Welcome to the Ohio Home Inspector Network Inspector Talk podcast. I am your host, James Jones. We are here with Mike Atwell, a certified ACI with over 25 years experience in the inspectors industry. Mike has inspected over 5,000 homes. Mike was a contractor in construction, a supervisor specializing in home restoration of older homes for over 15 years before becoming a home inspector in 1997. Mike is also a past president of the New England chapter of ASHI. Welcome, Mike Atwell.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Mike, we're interviewing you today about the Massachusetts Homebuyer Protection Bill. So, can you tell us what that journey looked like, those first steps, your initial inspiration, what led to you advocating for this home buyers inspection bill, and what was the motivation behind the cause?
Well, there were a few inspirations. The most pressing one was out in the field. We saw what this was the toll it was taking on home buyers. You know, people who waived the inspection and then found themselves in big financial trouble. We young families, everyone has had clients who were literally in tears at these post-purchase inspections. I had two families who had to put their house back on the market because they knew they could never afford the repairs, much less the improvements they wanted to make on the home. So after getting settled in and putting their children in school, they had to put the house on the market and move in with family. So the word that struck me with all this was just unconscionable. So all those things added up that I thought this is just not right, and it's time for the state to step in. So that's when I started on this whole journey about that was last April or May in 1922. Yeah.
So accomplishing the goal, the process of legislation, can you elaborate on how complex it was? What was your strategy? What was the most effective action in getting the right included in the housing bill bond?
It was it was definitely a learning experience. It was very complicated, and sometimes it seemed redundant. Sometimes it didn't really make sense that only certain legislators were seeing certain parts of the bill and things like that. So we were getting a real education. The basic strategy, we were very, it was a lot of hard work, but we also had a lot of luck. And one of the lucky things was that the governor was filing a huge housing bond bill in the same session of the legislature. And so the strategy was from our lobbyist and the attorney who drafted our bill was it'd be great if we could get ourselves attached to that bill since the topic was, germane to the larger housing issue in the state. And so that was it. And it did work. We got it bonded to the bond bill in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. It survived both of those. We got it through the Consumer Protection Hearing and the board and the professional licensure board as well. And then it went into the Ways and Means Committee. So we managed to get all through there, and it managed to stay attached to the governor's bill through all of that. And then at the end of it, there was a session, the one last hurdle where we had to keep it together. So it was complicated. We never knew what the next step was until it happened. And so there's a lot of work behind the scenes, but we did have a lot of luck in that regard that we could attach it to that bill. It's much more likely to get through the legislature if it's attached to a bill that the governor is very close to and wants to get through in this session and wants to sign it. And so we lucked out there.
So when we talk about hurdles and challenges, as you lobby for the bill, what were some of the biggest hurdles or obstacles you faced? Like how did you overcome those challenges?
Well, it wasn't in the beginning. It wasn't really an obstacle. It was just a lot of work. Working with the attorney to draft a good bill. We had a terrific person do this, and he listened to our concerns and our goals, and he fabricated a really impeccable piece of legislation. So that was just a lot of work, but it wasn't really, we weren't up against a challenge per se. We didn't really have any challenge. One of the things that encouraged me from the beginning is I got in touch with my local representative, who I knew had an interest in people's homes. We have this issue in Massachusetts where foundations have been crumbling because of years of cement being delivered to Massachusetts that had what's called pyrite. It's a kind of an iron, and it'll over time it expands and then blows up the foundation. So this turned out to be a big problem. So went to a talk that he gave. So I knew he had an interest in basically homeowners, and we met for breakfast. We met for a cup of coffee, and I mentioned this idea to him, and he said, "Geez, I would have thought that was already a law." He said, "I can't imagine anyone not voting for that." So this encouraged me to take the step and let's try to make this a law.
When you seen all of your hard work come to life, what was your emotional reaction to that when you seen that the bill had passed? Can you describe that personal moment?
Well, I'll tell you, for about a month before the end of the session, which in Massachusetts is the end of July, and I knew it was either going to happen then or it wasn't going to happen. Independently, I started feeling these little pangs in my chest, just fleeting little things, and I thought, "Geez, do I have to go see a doctor about this?" But I didn't. And when I got the phone call that it passed, they all stopped in a moment. It was all stress. And when the governor signed it, never had another pang. So I was so relieved after all this work that it it was now law. I just couldn't get my head around it for a minute. I was just so relieved. Now, the law that was passed was the distillation of our larger bill, and it basically just spoke to the intent of the bill, which is to say that you, the buyer, have a right to have a home inspection, and you don't have to declare whether you are before your offer is accepted, et cetera, et cetera. But it didn't give the regulations on how to implement that. Now, in our longer bill, we have a lot of those regulations and ways to stop the workarounds so people can't get around the regulations. And the bill assigns that task to the governor's housing office. So we know that we'll have some opportunity to talk with that office and go over all those things that were in our longer bill and explain why they're in there, and maybe they can improve upon that, but we're going to offer that as a framework for their regulations, since rather than have them, reinvent the wheel, there are certain things in our bill, certain word choices that are very important to eliminate certain workarounds. So we will have a chance to talk with them about it. So that's my next project. That's what I've been working on the last few days, is start working on that presentation that we'll give to the governor probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
So, are you a part of any future movements? Can you give me uh, um, what your vision would be for maybe surrounding states or your local chapter or anything, any other noise across the country where maybe there's some advocacy for some of the same buyers protection?
Sure. Well, about a year ago, New York, they heard about our bill, and they got in contact, with me, and I talked with them about the bill. I sent them the bill itself and talked to them about some of our experiences early on, and they have now taken that and they have filed their own bill. So their bill is now in their legislature as well. I mean, it was always our hope that if we managed to pull this off, that other states would maybe have a template to do the same thing in their state. So I have been in touch with, I got a call from Hawaii the other day, Missouri, Connecticut, I know, was following our bill. And I was recently contacted by Mark Goodman, the president of ASHI now, and he asked me if I would head up the legislative committee for ASHI. And I think my first project would be precisely what you're saying, that I'll come up with some sort of a package that I can take our experience, what was the work we did, the luck we had, the advantages they have, and then they can tweak it. I'll even just send all the correspondence, all our, dozens and dozens of different types of emails we sent to legislatures and past clients and realtors and stuff like that, to get their support and explain things. And I'll send all that, and they can tweak it for their own purposes. One of the things that this this movement has in its favor, and it had in Massachusetts, and I think would in every other state. Um, for one, it's just that the cause is right. I mean, it's a just cause. It's basically just trying to get things back to the way they were for the last 50 years, where anyone who puts their house on the market is going to assume someone's going to come and take a look at it. And any buyer who buys a house assumes they could have someone come in and kick the tires for a few hours and look at the thing. It's the most expensive thing they're ever going to buy, something they want to live in. So it's just the common due diligence that's been in place for 50 years. And really, the bill just wants to take that custom, that practice, and put it into law. Um, so what it also had in favor in Massachusetts was it's not it wasn't just a Boston bill. It wasn't a Cape Cod bill. It was a bill for the whole state. So every legislator in the house, in the government has constituents who are going to be buying houses. It didn't just wasn't related to just one part of it. So every legislator was interested in it one way or another. It didn't cost the state anything. That's huge. If the state doesn't have to pay millions of dollars to fix a problem, it's much more likely to pass through. So it's a combination of it's universal in the state. It's obviously the right cause. More than one. I talked to one legislator on a buffet line. I explained it to him that what the bill. He goes, "Isn't that already a bill?" And I said, "No, but we're working on it." He goes, "Oh, geez, it should be." And that would be the same for all the states. I think it's the right thing to do. It's universal, and it costs the state nothing.
So, as a strategy for other states around you or across the country, you're going to put a model together for us. It sounds like the right thing to do, but accomplishing that goal, if you were to dig deep and say it was one thing that would be the starting point, what would that be?
I would say a good attorney to write it, or you can just steal ours, and a good lobbyist. We were lucky to have a very good lobbyist. I got a recommendation from a friend of mine about a lobbyist. I called around to the legislators, a few legislators, said, "What do you know about this guy? Is he respected in the legislature?" Everyone said yes. He had tons of experience. He used to be a state rep. Then he was in the Senate, and he's been a lobbyist for us. So he knew almost everybody. And he himself thought this was a great bill. So he had his enthusiasm behind it, a lot of connections, and he was well respected. So he was really key. He did a lot in the background, and then have soldiers. The board of our chapter, even though this was a long shot, this was not a guaranteed thing. They were into it in the beginning. Some were skeptical, but they were willing to take the chance. So we were able to commit chapter funds and a lot of man hours from the board as well. So an eager board, people who were willing to get in there and make calls, send emails. We had to raise money. This thing was not inexpensive at all. So we were constantly raising money from home inspectors, from our board, from our members, etc. So it's those things.
Well, Mike, it was a pleasure having you on. Also, I'm really committed to the home inspection industry. I want to see this type of legislation and other things come to life. I think consumer protection should be in the forefront for all of us, protecting those buyers and the dream of home ownership. And so I really wish you the best with bringing this to everyone. I hope that we can also learn a lot from you and the steps that you took.
Absolutely, anything I can do. And the other thing, just I'll throw in there that you mentioned, we always focused on this when we were talking about it as a consumer protection. Yes, it does help home inspectors, and one group even accused me of just trying to make money, but we always talked about it as a consumer protection bill. It was filed as a consumer protection bill, and let's face it, we provide a very valuable service. Our service is consumer protection. So it's not being hypocritical or selfish at all, but we talked about it as consumer protection, not as a home inspector bill.
Well, I can't say any more than that, Mike. And in closure, I appreciate you coming on, and definitely I look to hear from great things about what you're doing in the future.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure.